Hello. Hello, ladies. So many of our audience members are in their 20s, so we thought we would kind of bring you back to our 20s. It's going to be a little easier for Yaa than it will be for Zadie and I, who have to look way back. But so Yaa's debut novel, which you should all read if you're like the one person who has not read it, is called Homegoing. It's an epic historical fiction. There are some people in here who have read it.
Thank you.
It's gorgeous. It was published in 2016, and she essentially won like every award you could possibly win, well-deserved. She was born in Ghana, the daughter of a professor of French at the University of Alabama and a nurse. And I love this. Anybody remember Reading Rainbow? Yes. So her first story ever, she submitted to the Reading Rainbow Young Writers and Illustrators Contest and won it, which encouraged her to be a writer. I'm like, thank you, Reading Rainbow. You didn't win? I thought you won.
I got honorable mention, so I felt like I won, but I didn't.
That's even more inspiring for the writers in the audience who don't win. If you get honorable mention, keep writing. And then she's talked about how Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, which she read in high school, is really like a click moment for her of like, I gotta be a writer. And as a massive fan of Toni's, I think that's so beautiful. So, yeah, you talked about that when you were in college, you went back to Ghana and you visited the Cape Coast Castle, a place where slaves were confined before being shipped to the New World, a place just 50 miles from the town where your mother grew up, right? And you returned home and you said you wrote a single question at the top of your blank computer screen, which was, what does it mean to be Black in America? And that question unfolded into Homegoing. Why that question? Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Sure. I mean, I think for me, the question was something that had been looming in my mind for many, many years. As you mentioned, I was born in Ghana, but we came to America when I was only 2. And then from there, we moved around quite a bit. So we lived in Ohio, Illinois, Tennessee, and then Alabama. And in each place, there were fewer and fewer Ghanaians. So in Columbus, Ohio, there was a large Ghanaian community. I felt I was going to the African Christian church. Like I still felt very connected to my ethnicity. And then by the time we got to Alabama, there were very few in the part of town that we lived in, very few Black people in the part of town that we lived in. And so suddenly I was kind of faced with this question of how to, I guess, balance or navigate my race and my ethnicity. And so for me, going to Ghana, taking that trip, trying to understand the ways in which Ghanaian history and American history connected, for me was a way to kind of open up this question of what it meant to be Black in America.
That's amazing. I kept thinking when I was reading it, so to give you perspective, it's descendants of this one woman that branch into 2 families, and it's linked short stories of many, many, many generations from slavery until contemporary America. And I kept imagining you in writing classes, like 20 whatever years old, saying, I'm going to write this epic novel that is, like explaining it to a teacher and having the professor, whether subtly or not so subtly, be like, oh, girl, like you need to pick a way less complicated first novel.
Yeah.
But I kept wondering, like, what allowed you to hold on to that epic vision? Which also I was thinking about the gender and race implications. Like, the epic novels are often written by like young, overly confident white dudes, right? And you successfully achieved this gorgeous, huge novel as a first novel. Like, did you have to squash a lot of haters and like not listen to a lot of professors that told you not to write something that big right out of the gates?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of the task in the beginning was not just squashing the haters, but also squashing that voice inside of yourself that says, this is stupid, this is impossible, why are you even trying? Because if you're not willing to fail at something epically, then you will never be able to write something epic, And so I think having that reminder for myself was really helpful. And then sticking to the research and understanding that I was kind of attempting to tell the stories of these people who had really existed. Obviously, the novel is fiction, but every time I read an account of what somebody had gone through in these time periods that I was writing about, I felt as though I would do them a disservice if I didn't try at least to get this book right.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm so glad you didn't listen to those voices. Zadie, you had success at a very early age also. I couldn't believe this when I read it. You wrote White Teeth at 23 years old. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it was published when I was 23, yeah.
So you really wrote it when you were 22.
Yeah.
How can that be? I mean, that's amazing. So, since then, let's just put in perspective for Zadie's career. She's published 7 books, 5 novels, 2 essay collections, also won every imaginable award, maybe not the one from LeVar Burton and Reading Rainbow, I'm sorry, but every other award that you can win. Become an icon of sorts. When you look back at that book, White Teeth, and at this 22-year-old writing, did you have a driving question at the top of your computer screen? I mean, metaphorically speaking, like Yaa?
Yes, I absolutely identified with Yaa's question. I think actually it's sometimes underplayed, the sense that when you're writing, you're not, for me anyway, it wasn't about describing myself or my identity. It was genuinely a question. I guess the question in my house was, how did these people come to be married? Which is a question perhaps everybody asks of their parents, but in my case it was a very long question.
Yes.
Why does a woman from Jamaica, from the diaspora, how did she meet this working class white man from an equally long ancestry in a different place? And then that question expanded to, why are there Bengalis next door? Why are there Poles? Why the Irish? Why this Jewish family? I grew up in this incredibly mixed environment, in this mixed school. So everything was questions and also deep voyeurism. I really wanted to know what was going on in all the houses next door, all the flats next door. I was really fascinated by other lives,
Mm-hmm. But why did that fascination manifest in fiction form? I mean, did you think about investigating it in other ways, or were you always drawn to fiction?
It's such a strange form because it really is lying to tell the truth, if you see what I mean. Mm-hmm. There is no way. When I read Yaa's book, first of all, I felt I wish I'd had that book when I was 15. It's one of my strongest feelings about that book. It was a book that I had wanted to read my whole life. But the rightness of it is not the rightness of history, or, do you know what I mean? It's the rightness that you feel in your gut, which is very hard to quantify. Why, when I read one book about the history of diaspora, do I feel this is right, and another book might feel false, or there's no guarantee in that sense, and it's full of risk. No matter how much research you do, you can't do research into humans, not really. So when I was writing about all these people, the risk is always, well, what do you know about the Bangladeshi family next door, and what do you know, in fact, about your own mother? What do you even know about yourself? It's not rocket science. It's this emotional content, and all you can do is feel your way through it, And research helps for sure, right? Yeah. You have facts, you have historical details, but the rightness or wrongness of a page is always a massive risk. Every page is a risk, because at any point the reader is free to say, no,
right.
I don't agree, I don't feel this, this isn't my life, it doesn't represent me. And so that risk is what I'm addicted to, in fact. The possibility of being wrong so many ways all the time, for some reason, is a great thrill to me.
You're a thrill seeker. So did you have the equivalent of a Song of Solomon, like something you read early on?
To be boring, it was also the Song of Solomon. But maybe a bit stronger for me was Alice Walker and The Color Purple, just because I don't know why. It had a stronger impression on me, and I was younger when I read it, probably. And then, of course, all the other writers. I was brought up in England, so I was reading Dickens, Roald Dahl, Shakespeare. It's a massive canvas of reading, Some of it which was close to me, and some of it couldn't be further away, but meant as much.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm sure that's a beautiful thing to hear, that your book had an influence on Zadie. Yeah. Did you have an audience in mind when you were writing, or did you have to sort of banish the notion of who anyone's actually going to read this in order to take that leap of faith to get it done?
Well, I mean, what Zadie said about wishing that she had had this book when she was 15, I think that's that's always my target audience, you know, is myself at 15, the book that I would have wanted to read, the book that I wish that I had been able to see myself in. I'm going to butcher the Toni Morrison quote, but she says something like, if you are looking on your bookshelf for a book and you can't find it, you have to write it. And I really took that mandate to heart, you know. I had never seen myself in fiction, and I read so voraciously as a child that the fact that, you know, I was able to, you know, find commonalities with these characters who were completely different from me was also exciting, and it means that I think that fiction does its work, that it like allows us to feel empathy for lots of different people, and yet still I craved a story that that I myself, as a middle schooler, as a high schooler, would have wanted to see.
And have you been surprised by who has responded to the novel? Have there been any interesting reactions that you were like, well, that's not who I wrote it for, but great, you know?
I mean, I think anytime anybody has told me that they've read the book, I feel bad, you know, because writing a novel, I think of it as, you know, you're kind of working in the dark for so many years, uncertain of whether or not your book will ever come to light. And so the fact that this book has come to light and that the light has been so bright, and that so many wonderful people have read it and gotten something out of it, I'm astonished every time.
That's beautiful. Zadie, in your most recent book of essays, you write, "My hope is for a reader who, like the author, wonders how free she really is," which I love. What do you mean by that?
What I'm wondering when I'm writing is whether it's possible to create a citizen or a civilian, a non-writer, who thinks as a writer does about identity. I guess that's what interests me. Like when I was a reader, like Yaa, I was reading all kinds of books by necessity with people in them who were supposedly nothing like me. Yet when I read Madame Bovary, I thought, I too am Madame Bovary. When I read Tolstoy's Ivan Ilyich, I thought, I too am Ivan Ilyich. And that's the experience of minority readers all the time, this identification across supposed boundaries. What I'm trying to do is encourage people in the other direction. So if somebody's reading Swing Time and they're reading about a little black girl in London, I don't want that identification to be at a distance, like, oh, look at this interesting exotic story of this person. I want them to identify the way I did, wholly, body and soul, no matter what they happen to look like, no matter what their particular background. That's the exercise. That you place yourself in this person's life, not as a minority interest, not as a, oh, I wonder how they live. This is your life for the duration of this book. This is your life. You live in it the way I lived in your books. And that kind of exchange is important to me. And also, I guess, you know, as a person who feels that identity is real and also constructed, I'm interested in coalition across difference, you know? That's the story of my life, the story of my family and partially the story of my country. So I'm trying to make people step into this girl's life as if it were their life. That matters to me.
That takes a real generosity of a reader, too, right? To believe that they will go the full way as opposed to this more sort of objectifying reception or read. And one of the things I've been thinking about with both of your work is that novels allow for this multiplicity of characterization, like this nuance, and that's very present in both of your work. And I, as someone who's trained as a journalist, I think one of our huge failures at this moment has been creating so much dualistic narration about who people are and who represents a country, et cetera, whereas you all are able to encompass so much nuance in the characters that you're portraying. Do you feel like, for like the regular people in the audience, like, do we actually have that failure of imagination about other people, or is that a representation of journalism? Do you know what I mean? It's like, people read your novels and love them, and yet then we go out and have all of these like incredibly reductive ideas about each other. Is that a failure of human nature, a failure of journalism? Like, I'm just trying to unpack why we seem so bad at nuance in this moment in particular.
I think fiction's wonderful, obviously, but it's hard to find a substitute for experience, you know? And in my experience, we're talking backstage about the kind of housing estate or project, as you call it, that I grew up on was class-wise united, but race-wise completely mixed. So when you live in this kind of coalition space of black people, Indian people, Pakistani people, Irish people, it's not that your lives are point for point exactly the same, but there are points of connection that you can communicate across. And you get used to the idea that perfect alignment doesn't have to exist in order for communication to happen.
Right.
And that's my assumption. What's happening at the moment, I think, is that unless the alignment is perfect, it's considered as if no conversation can happen. But it can happen. It might be clumsy, it might be awkward, it might be embarrassing, it might make you angry sometimes. It's still possible.
Right.
And there are things that you have in common structurally. In my case, in our housing estate, the fact that we were all poor, that is a coalition in itself. Mm-hmm. So I think in fiction that becomes much easier to do. In life, we bristle a little bit, no? If your story's not my story, how can we speak?
Right.
Do you feel that way, Yaa?
Yeah, I think what fiction does in part too is that it takes away this wall, so that you're not, as Zadie was mentioning, you're not becoming this kind of voyeur looking at this other person. If the fiction is done well, you feel as though you are actually living the experiences of these characters. You get to kind of follow their thoughts and feelings, and so in a way they become your thoughts and feelings just for that moment that you're reading the book. Mm-hmm. And I think that exercise of walking in other people's shoes, rather than kind of seeing them, watching them, but feeling as though you have become them, is the thing that when I read, that's what I'm looking for.
Right. Well, and especially in the case of Homegoing, you have such a macro and a micro thing going on, because you're getting these generations and these sweeps of history, of context, but then you're getting these tiny details. I mean, I can bring to mind different characters in these like tiny moments that made me empathize with them, whereas a lot of the media we're consuming is so flat and so fast and doesn't contain that kind of macro and micro, right? So I think part of it is a time thing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
And what you said about fast and flat, fiction takes forever, you know?
Yeah.
It can take, Homegoing took me 7 years. And so I was able to kind of imbue that sense of macro and micro because I was thinking about it so deeply for so long. And I think if you're writing and reading things very quickly off the cuff, you don't always get that second layer, that third layer, that fourth layer.
Yeah. Last year at the summit, I got to interview this amazing woman, Adrienne Marie Brown, who's an organizer and a writer, and she said that basically all community organizing is speculative fiction because you have to imagine the world that you're trying to build into. And I thought of her when I was reading your work and preparing for this, and I just wondered if you'd talk about what you see as the role of the novelist at this really contentious moment where a lot of us are feeling very heartbroken and kind of turning to media, turning to different, activist endeavors, but sort of trying to find ourselves in all of this.
I think for me, the mode I write in is the idea that, I know this is in some ways opposite to a lot of what we've heard while we're here, is that my own story is in some ways, for me, the one I'm least engaged with. I don't know how to put it. Mm-hmm. Like when I'm writing my novels, I know that sometimes there are characters who seem physically like me or structurally in the same position as me. But the problem with yourself is that you're so subjective about yourself.
Right.
And sometimes I'm the person I see least,
Right.
Whereas when I wrote White Teeth, the people I were really engaged with was everybody else.
Right.
A kind of fascination, a love, and a curiosity. And I think in terms of community organizing, that seems to me so essential that, of course, yourself is important in your identity, but what you're there for are these others. It's trying to understand, ask questions, what's your life like, how does it feel, what are you doing? That extension away from yourself into other people is what maybe fiction could model as a kind of citizenship behavior.
Right.
The idea that yourself is great, but it's just the start of a much broader story.
So the practice of curiosity.
The practice of curiosity and of being radically involved in other people's lives and caring about them.
Yeah. Yaa, do you have thoughts about the novelist role? Because it's interesting. You said it takes you 7 years. Like that's a lot of years of being, sitting in front of a computer. And I'm sure there are moments of thinking like, is this relevant? Is this, in these fast-moving times.
Yeah.
How do you think about your work in context of everything that's going on?
Well, I was really grateful for the slowness of writing Homegoing, because it meant that I was able to kind of the world was changing around me, but I was able to kind of understand why the questions that were important to me were questions that do always matter to the wider world. So I was thinking about Ghanaian history. I was thinking about American history. I was thinking about identity, and some of the things that came up in the book. At the time that I was writing it, didn't feel particularly relevant to the world at that moment, and yet when the book came out, seemed extremely relevant. And so that understanding that our curiosities are important, I think that's something that novelists can be aware of, or can kind of help us see.
I love that. I also feel like both of you, curiosity to its most granular form is questions, right? Learn how to ask really good questions. Stop talking so much, right? Could be a good lesson for all of us right now. And you talked about that your novel came from a question. I know you're just working on your second novel. Is there a new question at the top of the blank screen these days that's driving you that you can share?
Not as direct as with Homegoing, but it is still driven by questions. I think what I'm always attempting to do in my work is to feel as though I'm being deeply interrogative. And so if I can't name a specific question for the next book, but that desire to continue kind of interrogating my own thoughts and my mind is hopefully something that will be apparent on the page.
I can't wait to read it. Zadie, do you have a question at the top of your metaphorical screen these days, or a few of them?
It's weird. I just finished a book and it actually has an epigraph, which is a question. So that's strange.
Yeah, there you go.
It's Frank O'Hara. How can a person fail to be? I thought that was a really interesting question. In what ways can you genuinely fail to be human? To act like a human, to consider other humans. I wouldn't have thought that was possible a while ago, but now I realize it is. Like, being human isn't just a thing you're born with. You kind of have to earn it, It's actually a big deal. And there's loads of ways you can fail to be a full person. So I was putting that question to myself, in what ways do I fail every day to honor this thing of the human, which to me is kind of a big deal.
Wow, that's so beautiful. Is that nonfiction or fiction?
It's stories, short stories.
It's short stories.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, I can't wait to keep reading both of you. I feel so grateful for your work and the way you move through the world. And let's all keep attempting to earn to be human here in our time together. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.